everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and it's my favourite time of the week, and you know why that is. That's because it's Friday. Gotta get down on Friday, and that's because it's time to talk about my wrestlers of the week. Let's bloody go. As always, we start off with a few honourable mentions. Big shout out to Adam M, who got in touch to recommend Kez Evans and Michael May from ICW. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to check out that match yet, but rest assured, it was supposed to be very, very good. Also, Kazuchika Okada and Kota Ibushi, who both won their matches in New Japan to solidify their big match, I suppose, on January 4th at Wrestle Kingdom. They were good matches, but the results were never really in doubt. Nobody really thought that Sonada or Evil were going to topple either one of the big dogs to take their place in the main event of Wrestle Kingdom. Also, a big shout out to Mark Coffey and Wolfgang, also known as Gallus, who won the NXT UK Tag Team Championships, and to Imperium as well, Fabian Eichner and Marcel Bartel, Axel Dieter Jr. Mr. Bartel, who had a pair of really good matches this week, both tag matches on NXT UK and NXT US Full Fat NXT edition. But now on to my top 10, and this week's number 10 is someone who I don't think has been on this year at all, and his name is Damien Priest, formerly known, of course, as Ring of Honor's Punishment Martinez. Damien Priest main evented NXT this week on Wednesday, taking on the Bruiserweight Pete Dunne in the main event. And to the surprise of quite a few maybe, he picked up a victory over Pete Dunne, who has been very protected in his WWE career so far. He rarely loses a match. This wasn't a clean win, of course, with Damien Priest just hoofing him right... Oh, God's sake, I've kicked my microphone. Hoofing him right, my microphone leads just a state now. Hoofing him in the testicles and penis behind the referee's back, and then drilling him with his finisher to pick up the victory. Just need to sort this out a little bit. It's understandably a huge win for Damien Priest, and that's why he gets 1 point this week on Wrestlers of the Week. But on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, is it a big loss for Pete Dunne? Because we've become so accustomed to seeing Pete Dunne win over the past couple of years. Obviously, he had that mammoth United Kingdom Championship reign, and then even when he lost to Volta, it took a lot of huge moves to put him down. So I wonder if this is a bit of a shocker for Pete Dunne, and maybe it's brought him crashing back down to earth slightly. And I don't know if back down to earth is the right position for him, given that he is such a talented in-ring performer. But in terms of Damien Priest, as I say, it is a huge victory. I wouldn't be surprised if they met again in the near future and Pete Dunne got his win back, but for now, what a week for Damien bloody Priest. What an evil-looking man. Number 9, and one of everybody's favourite unsung heroes over in New Japan Wrestling of the previous few months, Lance Archer. With Jon Moxley's travel issues, given the whole typhoon situation in Japan, very understandably, he was forced to vacate the IWGP United States Championship, which meant that there was a match for the vacant belt between Lance Archer and former champion Juice Robinson. Now, I really admire New Japan's booking here, because the safe thing to do, and I think maybe the predictable thing to do, would have been to have Juice win the title again and then have another run, because he was a good champion and a popular babyface, but we have already seen him with that belt in pretty recent memory. But instead, they went the other route and they gave the title to Lance Archer, and you can't say that it isn't fully deserved. Archer, of course, had a wonderful G1 climax. He was many people's surprise package of the G1, excelling beyond what everyone thought his abilities were in singles matches, especially the one against Osprey. That was really, really good. And I just think overall it's a very nice story. He even put a tweet up basically saying he's been in this business for 17 plus years, and this is his first major singles title in any major promotion that he's worked for, and he's worked for quite a few as well. So really nice to see. It's always great when a wrestler who's been pretty good for the majority of their career suddenly hits a new level when they're at a more advanced stage. I think Lance Archer's in his 40s and really now is producing the best stuff that I've ever seen of his entire career. Number 8 this week, she's got a new attitude, she's got a new haircut, and she murdered the wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube men. How dare she? That's right. But Homicide will get you 3 points on Wrestlers of the Week. It's Bayley. Just want to point out that I'm not actually advocating murder, but she did stab those wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube men, and it was quite sad to see, really. But Bayley's got a whole new look, a whole new attitude, and really, I think it's the best possible thing for her character right now. Bayley was, of course, a very, very effective babyface down in NXT when she was the leader of the women's division at one point. She was having great matches with any contender that came her way, and then eventually she dropped the belt in a great match to Asuka and moved up to the main roster. And as we know, the story while she's been on the main roster hasn't exactly been the same. Yes, she's won championships, and yes, she's looked great on occasion, but often the booking has let Bayley down. I'm talking about her being scared to hit Alexa Bliss with a kendo stick, or her being betrayed by Sasha Banks and then not really doing anything to get revenge for a long time. Now that Bayley is fully, definitively a heel and you know, a malicious one as well, I think that's the only real direction she could have gone in, and I'm really glad that WWE have done that. She main evented Friday night SmackDown this week, taking on Charlotte Flair, whom she recently lost the SmackDown Women's Championship to, and she won it back. A result that I think did surprise me, but then Charlotte is moving over to Raw, so maybe I just got confused with the whole draft situation. But anyway, delighted to see Bayley with the title once again. I don't think she was really given that great of a run with it recently, so I hope that this run is a little bit better. The match was a fun one, with Charlotte pretty much dominating Bayley because she's the superior athlete and everything. But Bayley used a bit of heelish trickery, a little bit of wiliness to pick up the victory. Charlotte hit natural selection, then she was going for the figure eight, and then Bayley pulled her down into a pinning predicament and picked up the victory and won back her SmackDown Women's Championship. Well done, Bayley. I'm a huge fan of Bayley's, and I hope this is the start of a new dawn for her, because she deserves it. Next up, get your torches out, lads, because we're gonna, oh my god, that is cringy as hell. Get your torches out, lads, because we're gonna talk about AEW Dark. Yeah, it's a bit weird that the best match probably of AEW this week was actually recorded last week, but it went out this week on AEW Dark on Tuesday night, and it was the street fight between Kenny Omega and this week's number 7, the bad boy, Joey Janela. Janela is awesome in street fights, as we know. He's crazy. He just takes bumps that the human body should not be able to absorb, and he's perfectly willing to do so, to destroy his own body in order to destroy his opponents. It's a compelling character, but also I'm quite worried that it's how he genuinely feels. He thinks, I'm going to take all these bumps, I don't even care. Often crazy high spot, massive crazy bump taking wrestlers scare me a little bit, because I think, what wouldn't you do? What Janela didn't do actually this week was win. He did lose to Kenny Omega in that match, but he put in a really good performance. I almost had him a little bit higher on this week's Wrestlers of the Week table, but at the same time, I feel like a loss probably, I mean, he was always going to lose the match, but I don't think it does him any favours. You could maybe have put Janela up against a different opponent, one that he could have realistically beaten, but it doesn't hurt to have him in the ring, I guess, mixing it up with these bigger stars like Kenny Omega, or like recently as well, Jon Moxley at Fyter Fest. But he has lost both of those street fights, and they've both been really entertaining and really brutal, but he has come up short both times. Number 6, from one guy who just doesn't seem to have any regard for his own safety at all, to another, we're going to talk about Darby Allin, who sadly is not the new AEW World Champion. I've been a fan of Darby Allin. If you've watched the series, you'll know I've been a fan of his for quite a while now. He was one of the first wrestlers that I included on Wrestlers of the Week without really knowing who they were, because they just blew me away so immediately. He was probably the first person, I think, that did that really on Wrestlers of the Week last year, and he's continued, and it's been fantastic to see him grow and develop in popularity as the months have gone on. He had the biggest match of his career on Wednesday, main eventing AEW Dynamite against Chris Jericho in that title match, and he gave a very, very valiant performance. Even though he lost, it was still a really nice thing to see. Obviously, the most compelling moments of the match came when Jericho duct taped Darby Allin's hands behind his back, and then Darby just hit various moves without the use of his hands. There was a lion salt, there was a suicide dive, there was some kind of Jeff Hardy style whisper in the wind, like a corkscrew type thing from the top. At one point, he was like pointing head first down into the canvas, but he managed to rotate and not land head first, which is a relief to see the very least. Unfortunately, he did lose the match, submitting to the walls of Jericho. Now that, to me, was the wrong finish. I don't think that Darby Allin should have won. I don't think that Jericho should have lost the belt yet, but I do think that he should have pinned Darby Allin rather than submitting him. I even said on Graded there should have been a point where maybe he'd broken free of the duct tape or somehow managed to get himself freed from it, just because, you know, his shoulders wouldn't have really been able to go down properly, I think, if his arms were behind his back. So maybe if he'd been freed and then hit with the back elbow or the code breaker or something, that would have been a more believable finish to me, because the whole point of Darby Allin's character is that he doesn't care about pain, he doesn't care about what lengths he puts his body through. And unfortunately, they did go with a submission finish, which I do think goes a little bit against Darby Allin's character and may have even cost him some points on this week's Wrestlers of the Week. Oh dear. Number 5, let's revisit that AEW Dark street fight. Get your torches out again, lads, because we're going to talk about the winner of that match, Kenny Omega. Obviously, Kenny Omega was one of the absolute front runners of Wrestlers of the Week last year, because he was just killing it in New Japan on almost a weekly basis. But now that he's in AEW, we see far less of Kenny Omega. Certainly, at least until they got their TV deal, we saw a lot less of Kenny Omega. He was mainly featured in big showcase pay-per-view matches, and now, even though we're seeing him on a more weekly basis, I just feel like we need to see more of him. And that goes to show how good he is, by the way, that he still managed to rack up quite a few Wrestlers of the Week points, despite not featuring as regularly as many other competitors. This was a great match, though, the street fight with Joey Janela. The finish was awesome. The one-winged angel on the chair was brutal, but kind of perfectly positioned as well, so it didn't absolutely kill his opponent. But it still looked devastating, and it still obviously was enough to pick up the pinfall. Even normal one-winged angels are enough to pin most opponents. I also enjoyed Omega's performance in the tag team match on AEW Dynamite, him and Hangman Adam Page taking on Moxley and Pac. That was a great match, not just in terms of action, but in terms of character work as well. Omega wasn't really at the center of all that. It was more Moxley turning on Pac and leaving him to suffer a 2-on-1 beatdown at the end of the match. But at the same time, I still think that Omega always delivers when he sets foot in the ring, and it's always really reassuring to see. You know, no matter how good or bad a show is, you know that a Kenny Omega match 9 times out of 10 is going to deliver. We'll see what happens next. Obviously, they're building to that big, highly anticipated Omega versus Moxley match. I don't know who's going to win that. At the minute, I'd edge it towards Moxley, I think. But then Omega did lose against Pac, which was surprising. So AEW aren't averse to pulling a surprising decision or two out of the bag. But we'll see how that goes. But for now, Kenny Omega, good week for you. You're back on Wrestlers of the Week. Number 4, Sam Driver is going to be a very, very happy man indeed, because my number 4 this week is one of his favourite boys of all time, and the favourite boy of many people, I suspect, because his name is Jushin Thunder Liger. Realised I said Liger a bit weirdly there. Jushin Thunder Liger with a G in it. Yes, that's right. Although this week he was Battle Liger, I believe. He wore different attire, didn't have a shirt on, he had a different mask, and apparently, I'm not too well versed in the history of Japanese wrestling, but apparently this is what he used to wear. I don't exactly know when. I think it was maybe in like the sort of 2000s, the mid-2000s, when they were getting all a bit MMA, and I think he wanted to be more of a realistic fighter. I think that's the impression I've got online, but if I'm incorrect, please feel free to correct me in the comments section down below. But he donned that attire again. Obviously, we're on the road to Liger's retirement in January, and it's really nice to see him featured in these big showcase matches, like the one last weekend against Minoru Suzuki. It's nice to see Liger wrestle in this sort of match, because these days he only really competes in 2 sorts of matches. Comedy, like light-hearted tag team matches at the start of shows, or when he's got a showcase singles match, like more high-flying, agile stuff, like what he's built his name upon. But this one was more brutal, more hard-hitting, and full of bad blood between 2 very intense characters. And Liger's not always intense. Suzuki's always intense. Liger's not, Suzuki's always intense. Liger, maybe predictably, given that he's the one retiring, he wasn't able to pull out the victory, but there were some really emotional scenes after the match as well, which were really, really nice to see. I'll talk about those in just a second, because you'll never guess who number 3 is. But well done, Liger. Really good week this week on Wrestlers of the Week. A handy little handful of points for you, and I think it's his first appearance on Wrestlers of the Week in 2019. Number 3 is Minoru Suzuki. He was also part of that awesome match against Liger. It wasn't like the best work rate match of the week, but I think it was probably one of the best storytelling matches of the week. It was really intense, and then afterwards, really emotional, really nice to see. A rare moment in wrestling where it's a nice sort of surprise at the end of a match, rather than someone turning heel or just smacking their opponent and carrying on the assault. We actually had a nice show of respect. We had Suzuki, the most unlikely man in the world to do this sort of thing, bowing on both knees at the feet of Liger. Not at the feet of Liger. Liger was laid out in the middle of the ring. He just lost to Minoru Suzuki, for God's sake. But Suzuki found it appropriate to bow to him, to show his respect to someone who's got, you know, the same amount of longevity as Suzuki and who has revolutionized the business. So it was really nice to see him do that. He also won the match, and I just think the fact that Suzuki's always been such a nasty bastard and then now shows that he's got a heart is a really effective piece of character work. I liked it. It's probably only just a one-off because Liger's retiring. We're probably not going to see a face turn from Suzuki or anything like that, but I do think as a one-off moment, it did hit home in all of the right ways. Number 2 this week, he's been racking up quite a few points recently. He's become a regular fixture of Wrestlers of the Week, and his name is El Fantasma. So last weekend, El Fantasma took on his foe, Will Osprey, and they've got really good chemistry together. But this match wasn't just all the moves thrown at each other. I mean, it kind of was at points, but it also had a strong storyline running through it. It was basically Fantasma starting the match by saying, look, I'm a changed man. I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to rely on interference. He told his tag partner, Taiji Ishimori, to get to the back, and then Osprey sent away Robbie Eagles, his tag partner. So it was just straight up singles match. but then he tried to cheat anyway. But the way he did it was really clever. Fantasma started to cheat by doing it kind of accidentally on purpose. Like, he'd accidentally poke Osprey in the eye, and he'd go, "Oh, I'm really sorry, it was an accident," but it was to gain him the advantage in the match. Eventually, he did even just rely on Ishimori running down and interfering in the bout, and basically we slowly found out throughout the course of the match that this was the same old ELP. He's the same dick, the same heel that we've known he was all along, and it was really, really good to see. It was a really interesting dynamic in the bout. Ultimately, though, it wasn't enough for El Fantasma to pick up the victory. He lost to the Stormbreaker and everything, but at the same time, it wasn't the only good match featuring Fantasma this week. But I'm not going to talk about that quite yet, because it's time now to talk about my wrestler of the week, because that match also featured him. And you'll never guess who it is. Oh my god. It's bloody Will Osprey. Once again, I think for the 4th time this year, Will Osprey is my wrestler of the week, and I struggle to know what to say these days when he's wrestler of the week, because he's just been so dominant this year. He's had the best year ever in his career. I think personally he is probably my wrestler of the year. We'll see if the points table reflects that though in December. But I've seen a lot of people online also admitting to me that Osprey has been the best wrestler this year. But after his exploits in the Best of the Super Juniors and the Super J Cup and the G1 Climax, of course, we haven't seen too much of Osprey in recent weeks. He hasn't featured too prominently in Wrestlers of the Week, but in true Osprey fashion, he's just rocketed back into contention with a strong 10 points this week. What can you do? He won that match, as I say, against El Fantasma, a match that was probably the best match of the week on balance. It combined the storytelling and the in-ring work of other matches this week, but it did both to such a high degree. Like, for example, Suzuki and Liger was really good in terms of storytelling and pretty good in terms of work rate. Other matches had great work rate, but not much of a story. This match had both, and that's why I've put Osprey and Fantasma at 1 and 2. I just think that there's another gear that Osprey sometimes hits, and no other wrestler at the minute can seem to contend with that on such a regular basis. But as I say, that wasn't the only good match that Osprey and Fantasma found themselves in. They also teamed up with their respective tag partners to take part in New Japan's Tag League, and it was a really good match. And to be honest, at the end of things, when it's all said and done, I wouldn't even be surprised if that tag team match was the best of the whole tournament. But we'll see. There's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of good teams in there as well, and it's a round-robin format, so they're all going to wrestle each other. Roppongi 3K are in there, and I'm looking for those boys to pick up some points too. But yes, congratulations once again to Will Osprey for being my wrestler of the week this week. What else is there left to say, really? Nothing, apart from to take a look at the league table. So Will Osprey extends his lead to almost 70 points, but I have faith that Tomohiro Ishii can string together 7 #1 weeks in a row and take that crown from Will Osprey. I believe in you, Tomohiro. No changes until we get further down, but it's worth mentioning that Pac has a chance to move up into the top 5 with that match against Jon Moxley on Dynamite next week. Hopefully that's really, really good. And as we near the bottom, you'll see that El Fantasma and Darby Allin have jumped up into the top 25, but in doing so, they've knocked Daniel Bryan and Becky Lynch out of there. Aww. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.